Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce Professor David Kirk. He is at the University of Pennsylvania, and he's doing path-breaking work.
I want to hear this guy.
On neighborhoods, recidivism, and reentry. So David asks big research questions like how place shapes behavior, how institutions shape trust, and his book, Home Free, looks at hurricane and how that can reshuffle people's lives. And he's a well-known scholar, published in all the top places, including AJS, Crim, Nature, and so we are very excited to have you here, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Holly. Yeah, so I think talking the past few days about the fact that I think it's been exactly a decade since I've been here. So I've been exploring new building and getting to see a different side of campus. A lot's happened in the decade since I was here. In my life and in everybody's life. But one of the things, I mean, I mentioned that because it's just, it's fun to be a little nostalgic. But this talk in particular kind of goes back to some of the stuff that I was doing a decade ago to kind of fast forward with some new data and to broaden the research question a little bit. So in a sense, I did a lot of, as Holly was saying, I think when I left here, I was doing a lot of reentry. My last time I was here, I was doing a lot of reentry work. I'm still interested in prison reentry, but I've kind of left that a little bit. Still doing work on life course, but have dabbled in policing and police violence a little bit. But a couple of years ago, Rob Sampson and I decided to, during the middle of a pandemic, we decided to collect some data, which was I'm happy to talk about how that went. But it allowed us to kind of go back into some questions that he and I were thinking about a long time ago about the consequences of criminal record for the life course, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So this work is co-authored with Rob and also Garrett Baker. If there hadn't, Garrett is probably going to be on the job market, and he is fantastic. So I'll plug that, though I realize maybe there's going to be a bit of a hiring freeze at almost every institution for a while. But anyway, if you have an opening in the next couple of years, give him a hard look because he's very, very good. The title will become apparent and more apparent in a little while. But we're basically looking at the relationship between a criminal record and educational attainment. So just to give you a little bit of background, so tons of arrests in the United States, not as bad as not as many as it used to be, but at one point in time we were talking about 15 million arrests in a given year. 3 million of those were of juveniles. So I mean, I'm talking a very educated room. You know all about this, but for people that were growing up, in the 80s and 90s. This era of mass incarceration, there was a whole lot of exposure to the police and to the arrest, and it's very unevenly distributed across race, ethnicity, gender, and so on. And so Bobby Bram et al. Have this fantastic article from several years ago using the NLSY, where they, this startling statistic of 30% of Black males in the NLSY sample expect to be arrested by age 18. Only 22% of white males. I mean, that is just a staggering amount of arrest activity. And so, with information like that, it's like, wow, that is bound to be a hugely consequential life course trap that may reverberate throughout somebody's entire life. Now, when they were using the NLSY 9097, as I'm sure most everybody, if not everybody in the room knows, that that sample, they were age 12 to 16 in 1997. And so, you know, the situation has changed. We had, you know, had a crime decline. There's been a decline in arrest. And so the staggering levels of arrests are, you know, are not quite what they used to be. And I think it's important to think about the implications of that. You know, the relationship between arrest and the life course outcomes in the current context. But so kind of going back to what I was saying before about the last decade, so Sampson and I did this paper in 2013 of SocioVed, where we looked at the relationship between getting arrested as a juvenile and high school dropout. And, you know, this was, you know, 2013 era methods, did some propensity score methods and found a relationship, a pretty stark and large relationship between juvenile arrest and the subsequent likelihood of dropping out of high school. It was hugely detrimental to whether somebody would finish high school. We did, with the data we had available at that time, we did a little bit of work on whether it also hindered college enrollment, and it did. But most of the focus was on dropout. And so, you know, we were doing our research along, you know, in the tradition with, you know, a lot of other really good, or not a lot of other, but a few other really good studies at the time. Most, but not all, were using NLSY 97 data, and the story is basically the same. An arrest record, prison record, you know, somehow some kind of contact with the criminal justice system is really horrendous for, you know, for high school attainment, educational attainment. But not a lot of this work was focused on later in the life course. And so, you know, most of these studies focused on short-term outcomes, as Rob and I had done. Most of these studies, because they were using the NLSY 97, were using self-report indicators. And as folks in the room well know, I mean, both self-report and official data have their problems and have their advantages. And so one of the things to kind of give you one of the selling points of this study is that we have both self-report and official data, and so we can kind of run our analysis and see if it's robust to how we're measuring arrest. And then this bottom point, I've kind of alluded to this indirectly, but you know, a lot of this research, including my earlier research on the relationship between a criminal record and educational attainment, focuses on cohorts that were born in the 1980s, and these were people that were, you know, they were basically coming of age during the height of the mass incarceration era. But as everybody knows, I mean, so thankfully you know, it has turned down a little bit. It's not quite as much of a mass. It's still mass, but it's not as massive. And at least in terms of modern, more contemporary cohorts, aging through a period of time where there's you know, it's less arrest and less use of incarceration than it was at the height of it all in the 1990s. And so, hi, Karina. So we think it's worthwhile to see if, for example, what we found with our earlier study, if it replicates in a more contemporary cohort. That's you know, one important question. And we also think it's important to think about whether the consequences of a criminal record, if it's also true for thinking about college attainment. It is true that some people, you know, a lot of people with an arrest record do go on to college, to you know, whether it's 2-year or 4-year college, and so it is important to think about their likelihood of finishing with a degree. Anyway, so that's how we're kind of taking our earlier research and research of some other scholars and trying to build upon it. But just to emphasize a point a little bit more, and so this is a lot of that earlier work, including the NLSY study. I mean, they're focusing on what was basically going on in the peak period of arrest. These are this is juvenile arrest, age 10 to 17. You know, between 1980 and 2020, and as you can see, a lot of what we know about the relationship between a criminal record, a juvenile criminal record, and educational attainment is really focused on people that were you know, coming of age right around here when arrest was pretty staggering. But now arrest it's obviously not uncommon, but it's less common. And so, if we think about, for example, the stigmatization of arrest, if everybody's getting arrested, well, then is there really much stigma from it? Versus if now it is, less common that there's a concentration of arrest among peers in a high school or among folks in a neighborhood, maybe it's actually more stigmatizing and more consequential, even if there's fewer arrests. So we may see, if we compare cohorts kind of coming of age in the 80s versus cohorts coming of age in the 1990s, the effect of an arrest on educational attainment may in fact be of greater magnitude. And so that's one of the things that we're thinking about, kind of thinking about the changing nature of arrest in society and whether that has implications for just how stigmatizing that arrest is on somebody's life course. So a few research questions that hopefully I'll have time to get through it today. By the way, I have an hour total. Yeah, okay. Hopefully I'll get through it all. I didn't know if it was, couldn't remember if it was an hour and a half. Tell me if I need to speed up, is what I would say. So does juvenile arrest undermine the likelihood of university completion? I'm going to be looking at a 4-year, like bachelor's degree today, and that's just to. I'm sure somebody will say, well, what about junior college, 2-year colleges? And that's just, we can't figure that out with our self-report data. We know if somebody graduated, we know what was their final level of educational attainment, but it's hard for us or impossible for us to parse out with the data I'm going to show you whether somebody got a junior college, community college degree before going on to get a bachelor's degree. So I'm only going to talk about a 4-year degree completion today. Does the effect of arrest on educational attainment, does it vary across time periods? And I'm going to show you 2 cohorts today, one born in the 80s and one born in the 90s. Going to look at whether there's a leveling influence, and this is the nature of the title, the Great Leveler, whether essentially the consequences of arrest are the same across different socio-demographic groups, or whether it is more severe for certain groups. And then we're finally going to look at some mechanisms to the best that we can with our available data. So a little bit about the data. This comes from the Project on Human Development in Chicago neighborhoods. Folks in the room may be more familiar with the first 3 waves of data. A lot of studies that have come out of this. This was a combination of 2 waves of a community survey that was done, that were done in 1995 and 2002, combined with 3 waves of a 7 cohort accelerated longitudinal study, where both parents and caregivers as well as youth were surveyed at these first 3 time points, roughly 2.5 years apart, 1995, 1998, 2001 and 2. Representative sample of youth growing up in Chicago in the 1990s, and so lots of research that has come out of this. But probably less familiar is that we have collected 2 more waves of data on this. First in 2012, and so there was about 11 years of a gap between the 3rd and the 4th wave. But Rob Sampson and Rob Mayer went out and collected a 4th wave of data in 2012, and then Sampson and I collected a 5th wave in 2021. This was not in the middle of lockdowns. This was a little bit after some lockdowns, but literally we were talking with we did this with NORC. They went out and did the survey, but we were the first survey in the field for NORC, which does, as you know, a lot of surveys. We were the first survey in the field after lockdowns, and so a lot of our conversations, we were like, well, should we have should we have a mask? Should we have the shield? And it was a very interesting experience fielding the survey, just after some lockdowns. But it was multi-mode in that we did a web survey, phone, and then for those people that were harder to reach, we went out and knocked on doors. But knocking on doors oftentimes consisted of, we would let them know we were coming. We'd knock on their door, and then we'd say, all right, do you want to do the interview right here? And they said, no, I'm going to go get my computer and do it inside. And then the interviewers would go back home. And then we've linked the survey data with criminal histories, Illinois State Police and Chicago Police Department criminal arrest histories, going back to the 1990s. So in essence, we have 25 years of data on these individuals. Importantly, both the 2012 and the 2021 data, we originally had 7 cohorts, but because of the cost of doing surveys, we narrowed that to 4 of the cohorts, and then we did a subsample of those 4 cohorts. So it's very, very costly to find people when you're doing longitudinal research, as I'm sure folks know in the room. So that's the data funded by NIJ and the National Collaborative on Gun Violence Research. And so a lot of the work that we've done with this data the last couple of years has actually been focused on gun violence. This may be one of the first studies that's kind of not related to gun violence. But for those that are looking to do some longitudinal research, we are in the process of working with the first 3 waves are already archived at ICPSR, and we are working with ICPSR to archive the last 2 waves. And I think our expectation was that it would have happened by now, but it's an involved process to make sure that we are maintaining the confidentiality of the data, and so it's not possible to identify the people. Anyway, it's going to be out there hopefully soon. So I'd encourage you to make use of the data because it was very expensive to collect. And we spent a lot of time collecting it, and I am very open to thinking about collaborations if you want to get in touch. So that's the data. So back in 1995, when the project started, the cohort sample came from a representative sample of neighborhoods in Chicago, from 80 neighborhoods, which is what's highlighted on the left figure. So that's where they were in 95. Here's where they are now, at least in the Chicago area, still concentrated in Chicago, but kind of as opposed to the suburban areas. But they've moved out of those 80 neighborhoods, obviously. But they've obviously moved outside of Chicago as well. Interestingly, I was looking at this this morning. I don't think there's anybody in Pennsylvania, both either in State College or Philly, where I am. But there's at least seems like a couple people that have made it to all the major cities, or many of the major cities in the country. So we sampled them wherever they went. Not necessarily with the door-to-door. That was the telephone and the web survey, but yeah, they've moved all over, and but thankfully, there's a high level of surveillance in the society that we lived in, so we could figure out where they were, and we could figure out their email addresses and phone numbers, and we could find them when they were in Dallas or wherever. So just to set a little bit more of the context of the study. So here's when it started. Here's the 4 cohorts. So the infant cohort, they were basically born in 1995, and then the 9-year-old cohort, 12-year-old cohort, 15-year-old cohort. That's the age that they were at the inception of the data collection in 1995, and then just kind of moving forward. By the time that the data that I'm going to show you today, the youngest cohort, they're 26 years old. And so they're at an age now where, they're just past the traditional age of finishing university, 22, 23, 20, 24 years old. Our oldest cohort members, they're in their 40s as of 2021. And so, now we're starting to think about research questions, both with this wave, and hopefully we'll be able to secure funding for a subsequent wave. We can start asking questions about middle age, thinking about, for example, growing up in very violent environments in the 1990s. What does that mean for premature aging and things like that, and health outcomes? On the top here are just kind of some summaries of what's going on in a macro societal level, because one of kind of the life course moves that we're doing here is trying to think about following individual lives, but in a time when society is changing quite a bit in Chicago and the United States. So we've got this era, as folks know in the room, so they were, some of the older cohorts, they were born in a period where it was peak violence and crime started to decline in the 1990s and continued to decline. And the mass incarceration went up and leveled off, and then we had the Great Recession, and then we had some spikes in violence in 2016, and then 2021, and we had this pandemic, and so there is a lot going on in society at the time, and so over this period of time, including what I was saying before about changes in the nature of arrest, the fact that there's fewer arrests in the contemporary era than back in the 1990s. In the survey, we did actually ask a couple questions about the Capitol riot, or whatever we're supposed to be calling that nowadays. And I actually looked at that today. We did this is a little bit of a tangent. We did a kind of a visual in Socius a few years ago based upon that data, and we asked our respondents, whether they thought of the people at the Capitol on January 6th, whether they were extremist protesters or patriots. And actually, it was pretty low level, thought that they were patriots. But it would be interesting to resample and see whether that would be higher today, since the narrative on January 6th has evolved over the past few years. But I'm not going to talk about that today. But that was we basically were Rob and I were designing the survey in January of 2021, and we were like, we got to ditch a few questions, because now we have to ask about what just happened, the overthrow of the Capitol. So the dependent variable that I'm going to show you today is related to it's a binary variable related to finishing college. I'm going to show you some linear probability models, and so these are linear models, but with a binary outcome, and we're doing that for interpretability, so that I can talk about the percentage point increase or decrease in the likelihood of graduating college following arrest. But we also ran everything with logit models and penalized likelihood models with very similar results. We're going to kind of run models with everybody combined, and then we're going to run separate models, for example, by race and gender, to think about whether the effects are of different magnitudes across different socio-demographic groupings. So I'm going to use a little bit of the language of treatment and controls here. So our treatment group are individuals who were arrested in Illinois, anywhere in Illinois, by the time they were 19 years old. So kind of a juvenile arrest, maybe a little bit beyond. But I'm not gonna show you the results today, but just you have to trust me that we did some robustness tests, playing around with that age 19 threshold to see if our inferences were sensitive to whether, if we moved it to 18 or 20, things changed, and they didn't. And then I mentioned briefly before that a lot of the work that has been done in this area have relied upon self-report data. My very first journal article was a JQC article that compared self-reports and official data using the early waves of the Ph.D. CN, and found that, or concluded ultimately, that when you asked juveniles if they've been arrested, they oftentimes said they were arrested when they really hadn't been arrested, because what on earth is an arrest? If you're thrown in the backseat of a police car, that seems like an arrest because it's pretty darn scary, but to the police it might not be arrest. It could be kind of confusing. Or when you're stopped on the street and questioned by the police, and and told you're going to be arrested, but you don't actually make it into a police database. Are you actually arrested? So it can be murky, and so we thought it was important to use two different measures of arrest. So the main analysis is using an official record based on police data, and then we also did it with self-report data, and the results are consistent across whether we use self-report or official data. So that's a treatment group. I'm going to show you two different comparison groups. One, as I show you here, is what we call a later comparison group. These were individuals that were eventually arrested. they were later arrested, after age 22 and a half. The reason we picked 22 and a half was just because, that's, after a typical age by which they would have graduated from university. We play around with that age a little bit to see if our results are sensitive. But the idea here is that people that have been arrested before age 19 are going to be relatively comparable to people that are arrested at some point in their lives, or at least more comparable to people that have never been arrested. So we're trying to get closer to a realistic counterfactual. So that's one comparison group. We're still going to add some relevant control variables to our models. Play around with the age cutoffs, and then for another set of analyses, I'm going to combine the people that have never been arrested with the later arrested group into a larger comparison. So a couple different counterfactual comparisons that I'm going to show you today. So the Ph.D. data collection is very rich in covariates, so demographics, various family, socioeconomic status indicators, what we call family troubles, whether people in the family have had contact with the criminal justice system, mental health challenges, addiction, things like that. A whole lot of individual level information. And then we've merged the rich collection of neighborhood information from the data set with the cohort data. So we have ability to control for a lot of baseline kind of wave one indicators in our statistical models. Covariate balance. So I don't know if I mentioned before, I can't remember if it was on the slide, but one of the modeling strategies, the main modeling strategy is I'm just going to show you these linear probability models, but we did a covariate balance propensity score model as well. And so this is, part of the output from that model, but this just shows you, the red triangles. I mean, the text on the left axis may be a little bit small, but this just shows that, before, the propensity score model, there are differences between the treatment and the comparison groups, on some of our covariates. But, after, through the propensity score model, this is the blue, once you adjust for that propensity score, we're not seeing any differences. And this is by the way, this is the never arrested and the later arrested groups combined together. Okay, so results. So the first model is called baseline, no control variables in there whatsoever. Second model is when we load it up with all of our control variables, and the third model is when we have the propensity score model. And so mainly focusing on the second and the third variables or models. I mean, what we're seeing here is between a 0.2 and a 0.23 reduced, and again, these are percentage points. Percentage points drop in the likelihood of graduating from college if somebody has a juvenile arrest. So a very substantial decline in the likelihood of finishing college. And then this is the result. So the left side was the larger comparison group. The right side is when we just subset to those individuals who later in their lives engaged in enough criminal activity to where they were gonna get arrested. And we're still seeing a pretty, so baseline, this is without any control variables. When we actually add in our control variables, we end up with a 26 percentage point decline in the likelihood of completing a 4-year university degree if somebody had an arrest. So it's a pretty large magnitude. So then the next stage was we wanted to think about, well, is that everybody, or is that just certain individuals in our data? And we also wanted to think about, well, what explains the effect of arrest? Is it that is it still just a high school effect? And the reason we're seeing that is just because they dropped out of high school and they never went to college? Or, for example, might it be that some made it to college and but they had a really hard time finishing a 4-year degree once they got to college. So a lot of subsequent research questions after just knowing that, wow, there's an effect or an association that we're seeing here. So on heterogeneity, so these are the point estimates and the 90 and 95% confidence intervals. But what we wanted to see was, how different the effect would be across these groups. And as you can see pretty clearly, I mean, these are overlapping confidence intervals with maybe a little bit of variation. I guess perhaps more so with the Hispanic respondents in the data, but for the most part, we're still talking about 0.2 to 0.3 effect size across the various demographic groups. It's not, for example, one of our questions was related to cumulative disadvantage. It is not, for example, just impoverished Latino and African American males that are being demolished by an arrest record. And so it's all ethnicities, in both women and men. So this bottom one on cohort 9 versus cohort 0, again, these are so cohort 0, they were born in 1995, they were age 26 in 2001, and and then cohort 9, they were. And by the way, this is a crucial point. So we're looking at college graduation by age 26. So it's the same kind of period of time. So basically, the way it's structured is for the cohort 9, we use their indicator of educational attainment by the 4th survey wave. And then cohort 0 is the indicator of educational attainment by the 5th survey wave, which was 9 years later. But so cohort 0, they were coming of age in a period of declining violence and declining use of arrest in the United States, whereas cohort 9, they were coming of age and reaching adolescence and the peak of their age crime curve during. I mean, it was starting to come down, but there was still a lot of criminal activity and a lot of arrests. So they're kind of even though they're separated in age by 9 years apart, they are kind of different macro social circumstances. But ultimately, we're finding that the consequences of arrest are pretty similar. It's around 0.25, 0.22, 0.25 or so. So kind of these differences in the period of time when they were reaching adolescence does not have a huge magnitude in our interpretation. Though I will say, I mean, it is the difference between like 0.22 and 0.25, but but not in my view a massive distinction. So that's one type of heterogeneity. We also looked at neighborhood socioeconomic status. We see a little bit of difference here. For example, with the medium SES neighborhoods are least likely to people from those neighborhoods are people that, and these were wave 1 neighborhood conditions, so 1995 neighborhood conditions. So people that were kind of raised, at study inception in a medium SES neighborhood were the least likely to suffer consequences. But these are not statistically significant difference. And then we have some characteristics by the PC stands for primary caregiver, whether there was variation by whether they're the education level of their parents. And again, the point estimates are a little bit different, but not statistically significant difference in the estimates. And so I guess the story of heterogeneity is, and this defied our expectations, was that effect of arrest is pretty similar across a wide range of socioeconomic, sociodemographic groups. It's not that, for example, there's not a story of cumulative disadvantage in this data, which is what a lot of people doing this type of research are testing. We're not finding evidence of it. So I said before, is the the effect size is it really just everybody dropped out of high school, and it's really just attributable towards the kind of the front end of the process. And so what we did was we tested it out on the relationship on some different subsamples. And so the main sample, this just replicates the model from the earlier table that I showed you. Model 2 is where we exclude everybody that dropped out of high school and just look at rerun our models on people that graduated high school or beyond. And I mean, the point estimates are the exact same right here. So we're talking about a 20 percentage point decline in the likelihood of finishing college. And then over here, we subset on just those individuals who started college. We actually find, as you can see, the largest effect size for those people that started college. So if people manage with an arrest record, with a juvenile arrest record, if they manage to get to college and start there, it's hard, very hard to finish. And I'll talk a little bit more about why we think that's the case. One of the things we to look at mechanisms, one of the things we looked at was, Sarah Brain's argument about people with criminal records that they may seek to avoid surveilling institutions. And so, kind of civic political institutions may, in Brain's argument, these are not as much or not surveilling institutions, so they're kind of a point of comparison. But so I'm getting a call from somebody on the computer here. I'm just going to. Should I decline that call? Hopefully they'll call back.
Later.
Yeah, just when I'm done. Anyway, so we wanted to get a sense for whether it wasn't just college. If people are, if their educational attainment is being affected, is it because they're not just avoiding colleges, they're avoiding all types of surveilling institutions? And if that was the case, what we should see is, less likely to enter the job market, less likely to access healthcare. But we're not seeing an effect on healthcare and in labor. It's the effect of an arrest is unique to college, and so in this case we're not finding evidence of widespread system avoidance. And so at least in this case, Brain's argument, we're not seeing support of it. So that was kind of one mechanism we thought through. Oops. I think whenever we rejected that call, it undermined the clicker. You want to try again? Okay, perfect. Okay, so key takeaways. So it looks like a 20 to 30% percentage point decline in the likelihood of a four-year degree following a juvenile arrest record. Pretty consistent effect across different groups. And it's true not just for the whole sample, it also is true for individuals that managed to finish high school despite an arrest record, a juvenile arrest record. And it's even more true for people that started college. In fact, a greater magnitude consequence of that record for people that started college. And not a byproduct of system avoidance or general delinquency. I would, on that last point, let me just state that, so for cohort 0, we don't have a measure of delinquency, because when we asked about delinquency, they were very young, and they would have said nothing, or they actually couldn't say anything because they were infants. The 9-year-olds, we do have measures of delinquency. Because at wave 1, they were 9 years old, and by wave 3, when we were asking a whole lot of delinquency questions, they were 15 years old. And so I didn't show you the analysis here, but we have a set of models where we just focus on the 9-year-old cohorts, where we have very rich measures of delinquency, and controlling for delinquency does not wipe out the association. So what's going on here? Why is it that there is a very sizable consequence of an arrest? Well, one possible scenario is institutional exclusion, both at the high school level and the college level. It could be that that institutions have in place various mechanisms or policies that that push people out of the institutions. And so, for example, high school programs for problem kids is a type of thing, which, oftentimes these types of programs are considered dropout factories. So there might be mechanisms of institutional exclusion, somewhat related. There's some work looking at the effect of contact with the criminal justice system on absenteeism and suspension. And so, yes, it is true that people that have had contact with the criminal justice system, they are, more likely to miss time in school, in part because they are, having to go to court, having to go see a probation officer, things like that. Not necessarily because they want to miss school, but because they kind of have to miss school, and it's harder to keep them in the educational environment, and that stunts their ability to graduate from high school, may undermine their GPA, which may undermine their ability to get into a better university setting. So that's part of what may be going on here. So we did a little bit of testing of whether this is related to, once somebody gets arrested, whether their educational expectations and aspirations change. We actually didn't find evidence of that, but that is a common scenario in this type of literature, that, once somebody is saddled with the scarlet letter, that, they start thinking perhaps rationally about their prospects in life, and realize, what's the point of, $250,000 or whatever it is of university debt if I still can't get a job because of the stigma of this arrest record. So maybe it changes their aspirations and expectations. Though again, in this particular case, we did not find evidence of this, but I still think it's an important hypothesis for people to test out in this research area. Colleges may discriminate in the application process. There's been a lot of change on this over time. The Common App used to ask about this. This is the 2013 version of it. The question at the bottom: have you ever been adjudicated guilty or convicted of a misdemeanor, felony, or other crime? I mean, wow, misdemeanor. Who hasn't, right? I mean, it's but they then a few years later, by 2018, the Common App dropped this, but not every institution uses the Common application. So at my former job, I remember having conversations about, we were trying to think about how we could improve campus safety, and and part of the discussion was like, well, what are our students like? And I was like, ooh, so what's going to happen here? I mean, are we gonna start asking for more information about criminal backgrounds, and let's think about the implication of that. But the discussion and the discussions that happen, I'm sure, at Penn State and at University of Pennsylvania about, like, how to create a safe environment for our students, may come to wanting more information about our students and staff. But it's like, well, that has, we're criminologists. We know that has implications when you start asking those types of questions. It can produce a stigma, an unfair stigma, an unwarranted stigma. Anyway, but the Common App stopped asking about it, but some institutions certainly are still doing it, and so it may become known to at least some people in the university community when members of that community have a criminal record, and perhaps it has some real consequences. So at least when there was, sadly, a Department of Education, colleges to stop asking about criminal history. So kind of on the last couple of points I want to make is think about the type of institutions that the individuals are going to if they have a criminal record. I'm sure there are people with juvenile arrest records at Penn State and University of Pennsylvania, but by and large, we're probably talking about institutions that that are under-resourced and that, may not have a great track record of finishing people in, in 4 years of time. And, so there may be certain types of institutions that have less resources to help people along. People with criminal records may have, do have a challenge with financial aid. So I think there's, so even if somebody can end up at a college, the reason, enroll in a college, the reason why we're seeing that 30 percentage point decline, could be just related to the challenges that the universities, your university, my university, a whole lot of other universities are dealing with try to help students, particularly first generation students or students from less privileged families with even just finishing their degree. If they're, don't have a lot of income, or maybe working, or maybe you're saddled with some other obligations, like, going to a parole officer, it's challenging to further them along, and it requires resources and support to help them graduate. And it may be that, lower barrier colleges just don't have those resources. So at one point in time, the Department of Education had this program, the Post-Secondary Student Success Program, and they were giving out pots of money, $3 to $5 million to institutions that had some evidence-based programs to help increase graduation rates for underprivileged socio-demographic groups. So, in my view, a very important type of program to help people with criminal records finish college. It was run out of the Department, or was run out of the Department of Education. Unclear what's going to happen with it, but you can probably sense the cynicism in my voice. I worry with the situation that I just spent an hour telling you about, whether it's going to, it's going to become far worse over the next few years. So on that note, future directions. So that's the bottom one. What happens when we dismantle a Department of Education with some resources for helping the types of groups that I spent an hour talking about? Is it going to make the situation worse? And so this is kind of, I don't have a specific research agenda around this right now, but maybe I should, and maybe some other folks in the room should think about this as well, not just for people with arrest records, but people in general. But there's some other, for us, for our Ph.D. and research team, there's some other mechanisms that maybe we can think about trying out. And then we don't have data right now on the institutions that people went to. As I was saying before, we don't, for example, know if somebody's, had a community college degree and then went on for a 4-year degree. So I've been in touch with the National Student Clearinghouse about trying to merge our data with that data, so we can actually get more information on the specific educational trajectories of our participants, so we can have a better sense of what really happened with these individuals. Is it is it really the case that they went to particular types of institutions that may have pretty low graduation rates in general, and so it's is that part of the story. So there's more work to be done in this area, both for our team and and I welcome other people doing this research as well, whether it's with the PhD and data or other data sets. So I'll stop there and love your questions, please.
So we reserve our first question from a graduate student. So
Great.
do any graduate students have a question? Emil?
Hi, question. Thank you for this. It was really interesting, and I enjoyed thinking about like the educational outcomes and how it could be unique. And one thought I had, and I don't know if you're able to look at this with what you're kind of doing, so I hate to be like that person to start off with but for the people who are not graduating with the 4-year degree, I wonder if you have any sense of if there's an effect of rearrest during the time that they're in college, and how cumulative arrest records might stack against people, especially when you're in an environment with drinking and underage drinking and that kind of stuff, what role that might play in dropouts.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so Yeah, I think that's a great question. By the way, just for clarification, I know I slipped on some of my terminology. So these are bachelor degrees, not necessarily within 4 years. It's anytime, a bachelor's degree, anytime by age 26. On the question of, you know, whether there was, for example, subsequent arrest and the accumulation of consequences, then that may have contributed to the criminal record. I assume that is the case. We just didn't specifically look at, you know, subsequent arrests as an intervening mechanism. But I had done a paper in 2014 looking at the consequences of a juvenile arrest record on the subsequent likelihood of getting arrested, and you know, and just like as you know, as other people have done, and found that you know, that increased the likelihood. So I assume some of these people that were arrested as a juvenile, you know, it's a snowballing process where they're, you know, they are getting arrested again. They're dropping out of high school. You know, some of them are dropping out of college, and so there's perhaps a lot going on. Hard to disentangle, and so we didn't look at the specific influence of a subsequent arrest, but I think that's a likely scenario.
Do you think like the programs that you've mentioned, you know, is there anything that could be done about that effect? Or I don't know, about like adding on arrests, you know?
Oh, about intervening before, yeah, I mean, you know, if people are still actively engaged in criminal activity, then we need to broaden the interventions. It's not just about their educational trajectories. It's about, you know, are there other reasons they're engaged in criminal activity. So I think, yeah, there should be a broader set of supports. It's you know, I think that'd be worthwhile. I think the challenge is just that the supports we do have are not enough, and so yeah, where to start, you know, where to target. But I think, you know, my overall pitch with any of this would be we should start early in the life course before the arrest even happens, if ideally. But if the arrest does happen, you know, there are some things that we can do to try to put people on a, you know, positive life course path, and not on a criminal trajectory.
Yeah, the comment, I work with a couple students, and there's a combination. You were right on several of them, but this is what I see.
Yeah.
First generation, one parent is in prison. They're on financial aid. They're working part-time 20 to 30 hours.
Yeah.
They're sending money home to a parent, and they're paying their own rent.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's unsurprising that people struggle with finishing the university degree in that scenario. Yeah. Wayne.
What was the overall graduation rate, 4-year graduation rate? The 30-year drop, or 30% drop to even 20, I suspect is pretty darn big portion of.
Well, so overall, it's in the 40s, the college graduation rate by different characteristics, both for the arrest sample and the non-arrest sample. You know, this is partly, this slide is, you know, the message here is, you know, there's differences between these groups, which is why you need some propensity scores and some control variables, and maybe in thinking about, you know, having that later arrest group. But overall, you know, we're talking about a college graduation rate in the 40s. I can't remember the exact number, but with a lot of variation in the sample.
So that's an enormous difference relative to 40%.
Yeah, so if it was, you know, college graduation was 90%, right? And then you've got a 25 percentage point decline, right? It's still huge, but it's, yeah, but it's, you know, it's we're getting close to the same magnitude. You know, big.
Did you look also at before 18 or before like arrests that happened for 17-year-olds and younger?
No, the earliest we did was the cutoff at 18.
Okay, I mean, just because if they're adults, are they getting arrested on campus? And also, does it matter why they're getting arrested? Because like, if you get a drug charge, FAFSA, there's a whole bunch of work you have to do, but if you're, stealing or something, does that matter?
Yeah, we, I think we played around with that a little bit, but I think it was an analysis that we didn't pursue, but it's it's obviously a very, important thing to think about. I think it was a direction that didn't pan out or something like that. But yeah, I mean, given the history of policies directed, directly at drug offenders, that they may have special circumstances that, that make this situation worse than some of the other people.
We have a question online. The 2013 paper found arrests decrease the likelihood of 4-year but not 2-year college enrollment. Have you explored that finding further for this paper?
Thanks for the reminder. Wow. I guess when you're online, you can have the have the paper in front of you. Wow. No, we actually, I have to remember to do that. No, but that's in part because we, as I was saying, we in the latest data on educational attainment, we can't tell the difference between community college and bachelor's degree. But one of the things that we will do once we get the National Student Clearinghouse data is do something like that and see if, for example, that finding replicates. And by the way, that 2013 study, that was based upon the older cohorts. And this is based upon the youngest cohorts, but one version of what we can do next is also because we're going to get National Student Clearinghouse data on everybody that was ever in the study, and so we can look at everybody's educational trajectories, and so that that might have been the distinction may have been because they were different cohorts and they were coming of age in a different period of time, but we'll see. That's a great question, and really hold the speaker to task by wow, I wrote what?
So here it looks like the white effect of arrest is huge, but it's your point estimate before it looked like it was not statistically.
Yeah, so it was barely. Yeah, it was. Yeah.
And so it's not a power issue, right? So there's just a lot of more heterogeneity.
Well, there is some power issue. Yeah, I mean, this the analyses are based on about 400 people. And then when you subset it, I might have it in here somewhere, but when you subset by ethnicity, we might be talking about like 100 white individuals in the sample.
Just less reliable.
Please.
Will the National Clearinghouse data have information about which students received like FAFSA assistance? Do you know?
That's a great question. Anybody in the room know that? I haven't. I mean, I'm familiar with the NSC data, but I've actually never integrated it with the data set before.
I just wonder how much ability to kind of receive FAFSA, assistance through the FAFSA might mediate or moderate your results, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see what's in that data. We do have some self-report indicators establishing the temporal order of some of the questions we asked about. Social support, supports is hard to work out with self-report data. So it'd be good to have, if it's in the NSC, it would be great to have that. I'm just not sure at this point in time. Yep.
Yeah, thanks. This is just a data curiosity question. So your neighborhood effects were baseline I assume from the community surveys that were done in the early, and they're all over the place. And I know you can't do community surveys in Dallas and New York and wherever they are now, but do you ask them any like self-reported neighborhood conditions or neighborhood climate on the follow-up surveys?
So we asked them about collective efficacy. We asked them about legal cynicism. Trying to think. We asked them about policing. That's kind of, there's some legal cynicism, and then we ask them about how abusive the police are in their neighborhood. thing. So anyway, so that's kind of so those are individual level neighborhood indicators. But yeah, I don't think in the current context, but I don't think, because we kind of wanted to keep the covariates at baseline, I don't think we did anything with those neighborhood measures in this analysis. But yeah, in some other work we're looking at, for example, the relationship between police violence and legal cynicism in wave 5, whether being grown up in an environment with a lot of police violence, whether it leads to high levels of cynicism.
But you could conceivably see whether this effect holds across different levels of neighborhood collective efficacy.
That might explain the odd finding about the lack of cumulative disadvantage that you were showing, where the affluent neighborhoods had a stronger impact.
Yeah.
or
Oh,
less.
the kind of it was the medium, the middle, medium SES neighborhoods. Yeah. Yeah.
That might
Yeah.
be good.
Yeah.
To explain.
It's 1 o'clock.
We have time for one more? The
Yeah,
gentleman had
absolutely.
Yeah, sorry, one quick one.
I just wondering if there's any heterogeneity, not my neighborhood SES, just by sort of part of the city itself, given kind of economists' love for proximity to education as a reason for it, and also like just the geography of Chicago and where universities and also policing.
Yeah, good question. I don't have the answer for yet, but I'll when I'm back here in 2035, I'll tell you. Thank you all.